are watching Krights TV, where the truth continues.
Case workers and social workers are often guilty of fraud. They withhold and destroy evidence, and they seek wrongly to terminate parental rights while being protected by state immunity. There is a huge bureaucracy made up of judges, court-appointed attorneys, guardian ad litems, social workers, state employees, court investigators, therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, foster parents, adoptive parents, and on, who are looking to the children in state care for their job security. Judges have control over private living arrangements and income of 48.3 million Americans. The United States Census Bureau reported in 2002 that $40 billion in transfer payments were made between households of custody parents and other parents. That money, $40 billion, is under the direction and control of family court judges in environments covered with confidentiality laws that protect the wrong people. Fathers are victims of this unjust system. Child support payments, even without having visits with their children, are choking the very life out of fathers. 3 fathers, of whom I am aware and have been in touch with, committed suicide in the last 12 months because they lost the opportunity to even visit with their children. These are crimes against humanity for financial gain. Rights are removed from parents, human rights, civil rights, and even religious rights. One illustration of what took place in my district is that after so many calls, I decided to call a meeting in one of the counties of my own district. I personally called 37 families that had been in touch with me who had all lost their children, grandchildren. I had them meet me in the library one Saturday morning. We started at 9 o'clock and we ended at 9 o'clock. We had 50 families standing outside the door that could not get in. We didn't have time to talk with them. There was incredible anguish and profound suffering from these families. Some children had been taken off the school bus, taken out of the hospitals, or taken out of their homes in the middle of the night, and even worse. It was just an incredible ordeal. These parents, trapped in the system, become like refugees. They're dazed and glazed and have no one of whom to turn. They do not know what to do, and the loss of their children is devastating. After having worked in this arena for several years, I do not believe that a single child comes out whole after having been in this system. Many foster children make up the homeless population of today. I introduced legislation, Senate Bill 415, in my last session. A substitute bill was written at the last minute by the chairman of the Judicial Committee. All the strong points of my bill had been compromised. I was told, accept it, Senator. At least you will get some legislation passed. And I answered with, obviously, you do not know me. I did not come to the Capitol to get legislation passed. I came to make a difference. What can be done? An independent audit should be called on every state of all Child Protective Services departments. I am in touch with congressmen and state officials, and the door may be possibly opening very slowly. A federal congressional hearing is needed. But let me add, due to the hundreds upon hundreds of cases that I've been called to consider, I placed calls to state senators, representatives in their respective states across the country, asking them to help me with certain families. And I was told, if I help that family, or if I help you, I will lose my job. Remove, abolish the federal and state financial incentives, and those are taxpayer dollars. Those dollars have turned CPS into a business that takes children and separates families for money. Open family court. Remove the confidentiality laws. Give parents their rights verbally and in writing. I even feel that to terminate the rights of parents, the case should be heard before a jury. Family rights and parents' rights must be protected. We do not need more influence like the UN's Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's anti-parent, anti-child, and anti-common sense for the family. There has to be perseverance for any great reform, and great reform is needed in this area. As Charles Spurgeon put it, how do you tame a lion that is well fed? First, he must be brought down. Second, his stomach must be lowered. How do you tame Child Protective Services? It may be only by closing it completely and starting over at the beginning with pro-family values. In closing, let me remind you that there is case law from state appellate and federal district courts, and up to the United States Supreme Court, all of which affirm the constitutionality of the rights of parents to actually be parents to their children. There's biblical law too. It goes like this: speak up for those who can't speak for themselves, and for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy. Thank you.
I was making all my child support payments. Then out of nowhere, they started garnishing my wages. Now they say I owe thousands of dollars and I've never been behind once on my child support. So they take my driver's license for no reason, leave me next to nothing to live on, and now they're threatening to throw me in jail. I haven't seen or talked to my kids in 18 months. It's out of control. I never abandoned my kids. I always wanted to be there and have always tried to be there for them. Somebody's got to do something. What is the reason for all this?
You are watching Krights television, streaming 24 hours on the issues that concern non-custodial parents. Krights, exposing child support corruption. Krights, putting the links between parental alienation and narcissistic behavior, making it challengeable disorders
that can be linked together, and even children can be tested. Krights. We are Krights TV, streaming 24/7 for you, the non-custodial parent. We are a free form. We are available to any non-custodial parent out there that needs to get their story out. Stream your videos with us. Let us all become a voice. We are no one, but we are everyone. We are the non-custodial parent. We are Krights. K for kids, because kids have the rights to be with both parents. We are Krights, a voice, a message, an idea. We are not one person, we are not two people, we are a mass of millions of non-custodial parents, their children, and their extended families who have been affected grossly and aberrantly by the child support enforcement system, by the abuse of alienating parents. We are Krights Radio, and the truth continues here when it comes to the issues of non-custodial parents and child support enforcement corruption. There are felons working within our system of child support collection. They are not the people that should be overwatching, and too many senators, too many other people are making millions of dollars from child support enforcement. Money siphoned off in undistributed collected funds. The issues are so deep, there's so many of them, and we have them here with the people who wrote the laws to expose them and all that has been happening. We are Krights Television, 24/7 streaming for the non-custodial parent. We are all one voice to be heard. Krights Radio, and the truth continues.
Every year, thousands of children find themselves caught in bitter custody disputes between their estranged parents. Many of these children will experience the turmoil, disruption, loss of trust, fear, and anger of suddenly finding themselves in a conflict of loyalty between their parents. Then, as so often happens, one parent begins the process of denigrating the other parent. They tell their children that the other parent is dead or no longer loves them. Sometimes children are whisked away to a distant place or even a foreign country. Parental alienation is but another form of child abuse. Already traumatized by the loss of one parent, these children now find themselves caught in an impossible situation from which they may never recover. Gone forever is their feeling of trust and intimacy. Gone forever is their sense of security and balance. Gone forever is their childhood.
The way it has affected my relationships is it's made me very conscious that the people who love you or whom you love are very capable of hurting you. My name is Anthony Francis Wakefield, known as Tony Wakefield by everyone, and we're in Mexico City. I was actually born in Atlanta. My mother's Mexican from Chiapas, the southernmost part of Mexico, the country. And my father's American. He was raised in Atlanta. They met in Atlanta, and I was born and lived there until I was like 3 years old. At which point my father had this romantic idea of living in Latin America, and convinced or talked my mother into moving into Mexico. My father was like a hero to me. I really looked up to him. Growing up in Mexico, he was taller than most average men. He's a really, really tall man. Robust, Yeah, so I mean, I guess that enhanced the sense of he was like a super dad. He had a very successful job. He was also very tender, very loving and tender with me. The happiest period of my life was my childhood up until the time when I turned 10 years old. I think back of it as a very sunny. I think of sun. When my parents split up it became a very dark place.
What happened to me, being abducted and all the negative messages I got about my mom, this was serious, serious, serious child abuse. The sheer mental torture that I went through as a kid, the fear, and now looking back and seeing that I was manipulated by my dad in the way that I was for his own interests. I mean, this is pure child abuse. My name is Cecilia, and we're in Oslo, Norway, which is the place that I was abducted from as a 4-year-old child. I was born in 1970 in Denmark to an American father and a Norwegian mother. And then when I was 3, my parents separated. My mother came back to Norway, which is where she was from. She settled in Oslo with me. She brought me to Denmark quite a few times to visit my dad or to drop me off there to stay for a few weeks with my father. He came here to Norway a lot and visited, and it was very open. He'd come for dinner or stay for a few days, or he'd come and pick me up and we'd go on vacation for a week or 2 at a time together. So there's a very open kind of relationship. My mother wasn't trying to keep me from my father and wanted very much for me to have a good relationship with him. I loved him very much. I was very close to him and missed him very much, so she wanted to maintain that contact for me. I remember my parents fighting and wishing that they would stop. And they weren't even fighting, they weren't yelling or anything, but I could sense the tension and just wishing that it would stop and wishing that I could do something to make it stop.
Yeah, I don't think I wanted to be afraid of my father. I think that was a choice that was made by my mother, grandmother. My name's Thomas Ryan. We're in Edinburgh, Scotland. In May 1979, I was taken by my mother, my grandmother's husband, along with my younger brother, illegally from the state of Oregon to live in Scotland. I was abducted by my mother for the purpose of preventing me ever seeing my father again. I was born in Eugene, Oregon, in America. I'd say the environment was middle-class suburban family. I had 2 older brothers and an older sister and a younger brother. My relationship with the rest of the family I would describe as what's considered a normal family relationship with brothers and sisters and mother and father. It was very much what I'd describe as the idea of an average family. Before my mother and father were having relationship problems, my recollection of my father was someone I was happy to spend time with and did spend a lot of time with him in what I would describe as a normal relationship. I can't really remember that much, really, specifically, about that time, about just playing golf. I remember that, playing golf with him and caddying. I caddied for him. I became aware of some of the relationship difficulties between my mother and father from I was probably about 8 or 9. I remember them having arguments. The relationship difficulties between my mother and father were certainly inflamed by my grandmother's input. The result of that was a divorce, quite a confrontational divorce. During the divorce proceedings, my father had moved out of the family home. I was still living at the family home. My grandmother was spending a lot of time looking after us. My mother had been hospitalised. I seem to remember it being some sort of nervous problem, and during that time I was looked after by my grandmother. This whole situation with my mother being in hospital and being ill, the blame was put on my father for this, that he'd caused this by his behaviour. And I no longer wanted to play golf. I can't remember if that was something my father still tried to encourage, but I was reluctant. It was something that was clearly associated with him, so it was something that was, why do you want to do that? And my father was being turned into a monster.
I was never aware of anything being wrong up until it happened. Somehow my sister knew, and I remember a couple times before my parents split up, my sister coming up to me, she was 7, saying, "Oh, Mommy and Daddy had a fight." I was also aware, maybe not consciously, but unconsciously, that my mother was a very difficult person to be with, too. That, she had a temper. As I said, the fights that I remember her having with my father, it was always my father, trying to placate, to make up, whatever. And those were the things I later on found out that killed the marriage. Yeah, my father was, he put up with that. He just took too many of those situations. Remember my father packing up his suitcases. And then there was a thing where they said, "Well, but you're going to take a little vacation with your mother, right?" With my mom. He says, "We're going to go to this little hotel in Puebla. It's a very little place, just your mom and the 3 of you." And I remember my mother being very quiet, all during the trip. We got to this little hotel. It was called Krights del Angel. I remember the name very well. It was what was probably the fanciest hotel I ever been to. It was small, but the rooms were like suites. It was like a little house, and had a great little swimming pool and all that. And then my mother got on the phone, and all of a sudden I started noticing my mother was saying very terrible things about my father, and I stopped, and she just said, "Well, you might as well find out. Your father's just left us, just abandoned us." The breakup of my parents, it was a shattering. It was a complete shattering. It came to me as a complete surprise. I had no inkling whatsoever, no suspicion that it was going to happen until my mother told me it happened. Afterwards, we went to the swimming pool. I didn't want to get into the pool. I remember the sun being really hot, getting the sunburn, the water, everything seemed like really bright. That is the first time I remember knowing what depression was, being completely sad.
One day in April of 1974, when I was 4 years old, my father came for one of his visits, and the plan was that he would take me to the Vigeland Park, which is a sculpture park here in Oslo. And the plan was that my father and I would spend a few hours there and have some fun outdoors. It was in April, so the weather was getting a little bit better. And he instead took me to the airport, and we boarded a flight to New York. But I remember wondering where Mom was. And eventually I started to cry and say, you know, I want Mommy too. My father's primary tool in changing my own perception of my mother is, I think the most important thing is time alone, just time. In a little child's mind or a little child's perceptions, I mean, just time alone made it so that the images of my mom, just my mother's face, faded away.
During this time in Oregon, where my father had access to my younger brother and myself, I'd say the build-up to these visitations was a key period for my mother to try and turn us against my father. The way I look back on it is that we were being treated not as developing human beings, but as weapons of emotional assault. Would say it was difficult to understand at that age what was going on. And probably, yeah, I would say I blamed him. I've been taught to blame him. My mother and grandmother said he was going to kill us. I clearly remember my grandmother asking me if I wanted to move to Scotland to get away from my father. And I said I did. And very shortly after that, I packed stuff into a car and drove to, I think it was Vancouver. I remember it was Vancouver. We flew from Vancouver. That was just like a game. Just like a game. Although at the time I stated I was in favour of this move, I now know that what happened was that I was abducted by my mother for the purpose of preventing me ever seeing my father again.
It was really, really, I like to go back to this word, secure. It was a secure world, which was completely shattered afterwards. This is Colonia Irrigación, and 6 months after we moved into this house, number 142, my parents split up. Once it became definite that my parents were not going to get together, my father wasn't coming back. And all of a sudden I started noticing my mother was saying terrible things about my father. I was standing right next to my mother. We were all in my mother's bedroom when my father called. At one moment my mother just stormed up from the dresser, walked over, grabbed the phone and says, "You are not coming to this house. You have no right to eat because you don't have a right to see their children because you've abandoned them," and hung up. After hearing that conversation, I kind of knew things were in really bad shape. She really wanted to punish him by having us not wanting to see him. My mother just got on this campaign to satanize him. And we were used as weapons by my mother to get back at my father.
We got to New York, and I don't remember too much about when we first arrived, what that was like or anything, but I remember just this hazy feeling of feeling really like, where are we? What's going on? Where's Mom? Like, something really didn't feel so right, but I don't remember too much about that. But I remember I kept asking my father where Mom is, and I trusted my dad, so I believed what he told me, and he kept saying, she'll come, she'll come. Then eventually he told me that, she's not coming because she really doesn't really want to come and see you anymore. We traveled around for 10 years. The most we stayed in one place was maybe 6 months, if that long. I couldn't talk about my mother at all with my father during any of that time, basically. He'd freeze up or get very angry or do something kind of scary, like throw something on the floor or just get really, really, really angry and really tense. So I couldn't say the M word. I mean, that was Mom, or Mother. I couldn't bring it up, and it was frightening. And it reinforced her scariness to me, or it felt, so she was the cause of that fear. It was her fault that my father would get angry and withdrawn. So it wasn't his fault, it became her fault in my mind. It was very frightening to talk about my mother.
We landed at Prestwick Airport and travelled to Edinburgh, returning to a bed and breakfast where we'd stayed the year before on holiday. On arrival here, the approach was this was the start of a new life. In a way, my mother's very own year zero. What had gone on before was not to be talked about. This was a new life. We were basically to be new people. We were Scottish now. If discussed, we were here to get away from a really bad man. I'd been taught to be afraid of my father at that point. So as a child, I believed what I was being told. I was voicing the views of my mother and grandmother that had been fed to me. I took that in, believed it, and expressed myself in those terms. If I'd been asked a question about what my idea of what a father is at the time, I would have said someone who I've left behind 6,000 miles away, who I'm not supposed to talk about, who wanted to kill me. Within a year of being brought to Scotland, my father came over here to try and get access to visit me and my brother. He turned up at our door where we were living in Portobello on the east side of Edinburgh. My grandmother bundled me and my brother out of the house, and we ended up out here at Seat and Sands Caravan Park. This was treated as a hideaway during the period where my father was trying to gain access to us through the Scottish court system. I guess it was another aspect of the game at the time. Unless we've got to hide from him, he's here. The bad guy's here.
She figured the best way to punish him was, okay, you have no right to see your children anymore. You know, since you abandoned them, you got to pay the price. You can't see your children anymore. She couldn't physically keep us because I guess the courts wouldn't have allowed her, because there were visitation rights and all that, from seeing him. She wanted us to resent our father to the point that we wouldn't want to see him anymore. We wouldn't do that because we still wanted to see our father and all that. My mother upped the tactics to keep my father from seeing us. She used every legal recourse she had to make it very difficult for him to stay in Mexico. The courts ordered that every time he wanted to go out of the country, he had to get a special permit from the Department of Foreign States. It made it really, really impossible, really, really difficult. Finally, my father said, you know, I'm getting out of the country. I cannot sustain this anymore. And that way, keeping him out of their lives, saying, okay, you made your choice, you got to pay the price. You won't get to see your children anymore. And you know, regardless of what that meant to us.
I don't really remember clearly when I was given my new name or another name, which was Sarah. I just know that I always knew that my name used to be Cecilia, but that now it was going to be Sarah. That was all about my new life and the person that I was becoming. When I think of my childhood, I think of New York in many ways. It was kind of the home base, even though we traveled a lot over the next years. We lived there for the first 2 years after I was abducted, and then kind of constantly came back there after being away for a few weeks or months at a time. Just I craved so much to be with normal families, or you know, with other kids, with mothers, with other dads. And you know, there was a big emptiness inside me, and I was a little kid who was being torn apart by this situation. When I was 6 years old, my mother found us again, and a court case was started. My father and I went off into the night. Yeah, my father and I just were kind of wanderers. I mean, I didn't go to school very much. We traveled through 34 of the 50 states. Really didn't have a home all those years. And then there were all kinds of subtle and not so subtle messages. Messages that my mother, she was a bad person who did bad things and hung around with bad people, and I had this black, dark image in my head of this really bad person. I didn't see my mom again for another 12 years after that.
And starting school here as an American in Scotland was not a pleasant experience. And was clearly an outsider for a long time, but made every effort to fit in. That was my strategy for surviving, was to fit in as quickly as possible. Later on, I was spending a lot of time outside the home. I saw basically involved in gangs, and one of the gangs I became part of eventually in my later teens was associated with Hibernian Football Club. Rival gangs used to come to Edinburgh, and me and my mates were involved in fighting with them. It was basically a drunk and a thug. The reason for bringing me over here, according to my mother and grandmother, was to get me away from my father, and it was someone to be feared. And as I became older and they were less able to control me, they said I was my father, and I was going to be just like my father. They had systematically described this person as a bad person, as a monster. and I was now becoming that monster.
During that period, between 10 and 16, when I didn't see my father, the 6 years, I wouldn't even consider asking my mother for permission to go visit my father. I was afraid of the way she might react, be angry with me or say something like, you know, well, you can go, and why don't you just go live with your father then, or whatever, you know. He's trying to impress you with all his money, but he's the one that walked out on you, remember, and I'm the one here, you know, working. It was that kind of manipulation that she always used. To an extent, I feel that my mother was expressing her own needs through me in terms of, you know, venting her anger. My mother really did get to my father by keeping us away from him, but she also hurt us, and she hurt herself. So there are no winners in this situation. There really are no winners. As an adult, the separation from my father has affected me, I believe, and mostly a lack of self-esteem, a lack of trust. Here I am, I've just turned 43, I'm still not married, not in a meaningful relationship. I just put barriers. I just don't trust him. It has affected our lives as adults. You know, I'd rather, you know, sometimes you wish they hadn't had you. You know, you'd rather not be here. My mother created a situation which damaged us for the rest of our lives.
It was very difficult at times to feel like a part of this person who'd been painted to be so evil or destructive. But somehow Norway was just sort of a blank spot on the map, or it was a place that I didn't want to go to, you know, just because of everything I'd been told about my mom and my Norwegian family. I think back to that little kid and I feel so much pain. Even the fact that I had had one perception of my father and his role in my life and how selfless he had been and how, you know, for years I thought how he put his child first and he did all this for my sake to protect me against this terrible mother. And then when that started changing, it just really screwed with my whole outlook on life and my own trust and my own perceptions in life. It led to a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety. I have trouble sleeping. I have nightmares sometimes. It's caused a tremendous amount of upheaval and pain.
As the years went on, when I was a teenager, I tried to eliminate anything that would give my past away as being American. I would certainly not tell anyone about it. And to this day, there's probably the majority of people I know nothing of this story. I would say the long-term effects of this for me, the enduring effects, there's still a self-doubt that can be crippling at times. You know, lack of confidence, and an enduring sense of being an outsider. My mother dished out a 20-year sentence to my father. One that had consequences for all of us. And I think now she's maybe realising that consequences of our actions. Are inescapable. Although I'm in contact with my father, he basically still is a stranger, and I've cut off all contact with my mother.
Hi and welcome to Krights TV, the place to break free from narcissistic abuse with quantum tools and understandings. So today's episode is called How to Outsmart a Narcissist, and so many people ask this question. And when we were in the trenches with a narcissist, or when you are in the trenches with a narcissist, absolutely, you'd love to outsmart them. And, you know, you'd love to win. You'd love to beat them because we've been hurt. It's really devastating with a narcissist to think that somebody who, you know, deeply loved and cared for you, or someone who's supposed to care and love for you, has got the ability to literally throw you under a bus. And hurt people want to hurt people because they're hurting. It's really, really normal to want to strike back and to outsmart a narcissist, or maybe you're simply wanting to do that for your own protection and your defense because you feel like you're getting ripped apart. And in all the years that I've been helping people recover from narcissistic abuse, I have never seen one person that is fronting or wanting to outsmart a narcissist. I've actually never seen one person be able to pull that off. And I want to deeply explain the psychological reasons for that. The psychological reasons for that is because a narcissist is a boundaryless individual who doesn't have a conscience, who's got a highly energized ego. And what that means, that if you're going into battle with a narcissist at that level, it's like fighting somebody that's got grenades and napalm and an atom bomb strapped to them. It's crazy because this person would rather self-destruct and take you out with them than have you beat them. Because the reason is the narcissist's ego is so monstrous. It's this incredible insecurity of, if you get the upper hand and if you defeat me, I'm annihilated. That's what the ego says. So that means that the narcissist will literally stop at nothing to render you powerless and to get the upper hand to make sure that he or she wins. And the narcissist knows the best way to do that. And he or she knows the best way to do that is to line you up with your fear, with your pain, with your insecurities, with the parts of you that are trying to hold the narcissist accountable for your source of love, approval, or security. And the narcissist intimately knows where your weak links are and how to hit them hard to take you out of the game. So if you were going to beat a narcissist when you're coming at it from, I want to outsmart them, I want to win, from a level of the mind, the logical mind, or your ego, and when people can actually or think that they can do that or do that, you know, I would really have to say, will the real narcissist stand up? Because you would have to be capable of, boundaryless behavior, no conscience, being able to play on the same playing field as the narcissist. You know, so really, you've got to have a false self the size of a house that's totally annihilated your true self to be able to get in the field and play it out that way. And if you were playing it out that way, you've got ego versus ego, which is Godzilla versus the gorilla. And whoever's got the biggest ego is going to win. So unless your ego has totally annihilated your true self, the narcissist is going to come out on top, and you're going to be left reeling, being smashed with the wounds, your original wounds that the narcissist has fact-finded, targeted, and knows how to play. You're going to be smashed with a super serving of your own wounds that are going to be completely energized and blown apart in your emotional body, and you're going to be reeling on the ground with those wounds if you get into the ring and try and beat a narcissist from a level of unconsciousness. And what I mean by that is, when we're in our logic and we're in our heads and our minds, we're staying very unconscious to the truth of what's going on here. We might even be trying to hit it at a psychological level, but we've never really understood the deeper soul level that this is going on. And at the deeper soul level, narcissists are soul contracts. They're aids, angels in disguise, that have come into our life through serendipity, not really, more like synchronicity. They've come into our life for a significant purpose, which is to make our unconscious wounds conscious, so that finally we can go to them, we can claim them, we can feel them and heal them and up-level them, because you cannot heal what you're not prepared to feel. So if we're not self-partnered, we can't heal. So we're coming home to ourselves to self-partner, to feel, heal, and up-level these wounds so that we can be free from them. Not free from the narcissist. We'll do that anyway when we do that. That's just part and parcel of it. It's really to be free of ourselves. Now, if we haven't realized that, if we haven't realized that this is a profound soul contract, and if we haven't made the unconscious conscious, we will be showing up in an unhealed inner childhood container, which means that we're going to be holding the narcissist responsible for our wounds, and we're going to be handing over a lot of fear and pain and insecurity and neediness, which hooks us into the narcissist and into the whole dynamic. And we're going to play out that not winning, getting our wounds smashed more and more and more and more open to get our attention, to finally understand that the narcissist is not the healer of our wounds. The narcissist is the messenger of them. Because this is the uncanny irony, is that narcissists have the most expert ability to find every insecurity you've got, every weak link, and target it with full intensity. Now, is that ironic, or is that actually really meant to be? I totally believe it's really meant to be, because that's what's making our unconscious wounds that were our normal. We were just bumping along in life with them. It brings them up in such a way there's no ignoring them. So if we understand that this is a soul contract, if we understand that the narcissist is in our life exposing for us our unconscious wounds to make them conscious, then what we'll do is we'll stop holding the narcissist responsible for them. We'll stop feeding the narcissist with narcissistic supply, which is initially very, very hard to do, because when our original, deepest, most painful wounds are targeted and smashed and they're energized, it's very hard not to hook in and hand over narcissistic supply and fight back and be terrified and incensed and devastated and all those things. But when we realize that this is what's playing out, then even though we are all of those things, we stop hooking into the narcissist and we confront all of those things in our bodies instead. We self-partner, we make it all about that. We heal, we find those, we release them, we up-level them, and then when we do that, we are freed from the whole debacle. And it's such an irony is that when we're not realizing that we're in a soul contract with an angel in disguise, and we're holding them responsible for our wounds, we want to outsmart them. We're going to try to outsmart them, but we never will. We'll only get beaten up with our wounds more. It never works. Yet the irony is when we detach and we say, you're actually the messenger, you're just the catalyst. You're the aid. This is all about finally being able to self-partner and come home in my own body and clean up my original traumas from my childhood, from my ancestors, from my beliefs, from the screwy beliefs of humanity. You know, and when I can up-level that, it's actually not even about you. And my ego's not even invested at all because it's not about you. There's no ego in this. There's only consciousness. There's only awakening. And when we fully stream into that consciousness and awakening, we defeat the narcissist, because there is no longer any fear or pain or ego battle when we're in their arena, in their vibration, for a battle to even take place. We've up-leveled to another frequency, another emotional frequency, another dimension, literally, which doesn't include egos. So they unravel, and this is what happens, is the narcissist in your experience will unravel, come undone, be defeated simply because you're up-leveling and transcending to another reality where they can't use any fear or pain against you. Because we have to understand, to defeat a narcissist, what is a narcissist? A narcissist is a false self. And what is a false self? A false self is a constructed image that's not real, that needs energy outside of itself to exist, to operate. It needs your fear, pain, and attention. And when you become self-partnered and make it all about your up-leveling, you snap all of that off. All of that goes. You're healing any of the original wounds that means that you were hooked into a narcissist. You leave it all behind. So the irony is, when we understand the soul contract, we have no need to outsmart a narcissist. The only need we have is to evolve ourselves. And then naturally, organically, we outsmart the narcissist, because we cut off all connection. So I really hope that's helped and given you so much food for thought about this.
Krights TV, where the truth continues.